Good evening. I am Matteo Rachocki. I am the CEO of Voodo Brewing Company here in Meadville, Pennsylvania. And I'm here to talk today a little bit about the beer industry, brewing of beer, and the how-to series. I'll get started initially speaking a little bit about myself. I was born in Erie and raised in Sagertown here, not too far from Meadville, and went to high school in Sagertown and went to college in New York City and did a lot of traveling while in school. My brother included, who is my partner and brewer at Voodo Brewing. And during our travels, we experienced a lot of different cultures and flavors, both in food and beverage, and aspired to one day design and build our own brewing facility, originally planned to be in Erie. So much to the fact that at one point we had filed for and had an LLC company called Bayfront Brewing. This was back in probably the mid-2000s. And during college, we would get together in the summer in New York and we would collaborate and brew and come up with recipes and start to develop our business plan for the brewery we were hoping to open in Erie. And during that time, the opportunity presented itself to myself, my brother, and a few other of my friends here in Meadville to purchase a tavern from a friend of ours whose father was looking to get out of the business. And that was actually our first real business, accolade into this industry, was taking a tavern that was a couple of spigots and more of like a light beer bar, and we decided we were going to convert and remodel this into a craft beer mecca for Meadville, something they had never really had locally here before. So that was what we had set out to do, and in a short amount of time we had gone from, I think, 3 taps to 8 or 12, and had over 50 different craft beers in the cooler and a bottle shop, and that was really where we had kind of discovered this kind of starving market for not only craft but local craft. And once that was kind of up and running, my brother Kurt, again, he kind of found an opportunity at Voodo Brewing, which was a pre-existing business. It was incorporated in 2005, and went down there. This was sometime in 2011, early 2011, and began brewing there when the brewer had left to pursue some other opportunities. And the business, unfortunately, had fallen on some hardships. There was some economic issues, as you all know, in 2009 and 2010. And all along the way, just a lot of issues after issue, and business had fallen on some hardships. So as he was brewing there, he was kind of becoming more and more aware of the business needing some attention. And simultaneously during that time, I had started my first company at the age of 19 in New York City. It was an event production company, and found a lot of success very early in my years to start a company and formulate different concepts and ideas on how to structure a business, run a business. So my brother immediately said, well, you should really talk to my brother. And the owner of Voodo Brewing at that time and myself sat down in a room and kind of hashed out a plan to try to save Voodo Brewing from imminent bankruptcy. And we were able to come up with a plan that I was able to propose to, at the time, just hit up family and friends for money and said, hey, do you want to take some stock in a company that I hope to turn around one day? And it was a big risk, and I'm very thankful for those who believed in what we were trying to do. And crowdfunding really wasn't a thing yet. So now it's becoming more and more popular, but it was an interesting concept to fund something like that at that time before it really was a real concept. And took those finances and sat down with some of the lenders. He had an angel investor and 2 local financing between the Redevelopment Authority here in Meadville and the Meadville Redevelopment Authority. The Economic Progress Alliance is the other. And sat down with those folks and renegotiated some terms, and it's much easier working with a local entity such as that than a big bank or something like that, which would have probably, seized the equipment long ago. So that was a breath of fresh air to kind of leave New York, where it's a very, very big hustle and everyone's out for themselves, to come to a community that's very much passionate and believes in small business and startups and second chances. So after we had a few successful meetings and were able to renegotiate some of those different terms on some debts and things, I set forth to work with my brother on kind of developing the brewery, improving the brewery, its efficiency, its recipes, the liquid itself. We spent a lot of time doing laboratory testing and sampling, and we treat our water very importantly where we work, as far as changing everything from different water chemistries, pH levels, to work for the different beer styles we're working, the yeast we're using, the hops we're using. So that was a very important time for Kurt to really nail down what we call our core brands, which I'll get into in a bit. And simultaneously, I was working on renovating a storefront, about 2,200 square foot space on Arch Street here in Meadville, which was in the same building that housed our brewery, and tried to turn it into a brew pub on a virtually $0 budget, which ultimately I believe worked in our favor, because we were able to be very creative with material sourcing, repurposing. We had folks from Allegheny College, Meadville Medical Center, to actually bring us different assorted materials that were either discarded or old or whatever, and turn it into something else. Everything from the ceiling to the wall treatments to the lighting fixtures, everything's previously something else. So it really gives it part of its charm and adds to the history and the story of how it was created. It took about 6 months from late 2011 to middle of 2012, where we actually opened our first tap room in Meadville at the Arch Street Brewing facility. And thank you to our community and everyone that came to support it. It was an immediate success and has allowed us to continue to expand our brand and our business model to ultimately encapsulate many more things. Since that time, we've opened pretty much every 2 years another tap room. We did one in Homestead, Pittsburgh in 2014. We did one in Erie on the State Street in the historic Boston store in 2016. And then this year, just a few weeks ago, we opened a tap room at our new production facility, which again I can get into very briefly. Those years had passed, loans had been satiated, and we could knock on the door of these local lenders again and say, hey, remember me? I paid you that money that we owed you, and I'd like some more, please. And it's really nice to be able to work with those entities and grow your business. And it was a very, very important, key, probably the only avenue in which we were able to do our large expansion, which, to get into the general gist of it, is we maintained our brewing facility on Arch Street, 10-barrel system, and purchased a secondary, larger production facility secondhand. It's originally from Central Waters, and it's a 4-vessel, 30-barrel brew house, and it allows us to produce not only 3 times the amount, but to do it 3 times a day rather than 1. So we immediately went from a brewing capacity, even brewing every day, maybe 3,000 barrels at best, to well over 30,000. And this was a rather large expansion, and already to date, we're probably on schedule to do, in a fiscal year, about 10,000 barrels, and we continue to grow that on a daily basis as we can procure and add more tanks. The more tanks we have, the more we can brew, and the more often, we can move liquid around. So that tap room then opened just a few weeks ago, and we just today announced that we would make it public that we are opening a tap room in Grove City sometime here in the fall, prior to the end of the year. And there's other projects on the horizon as well, which this brewing facility allows us to now make enough liquid to service not only our own restaurants and brew pubs and future endeavors, but to grow our distribution network. Initially, we were just distributing to a few counties in Pennsylvania. Now we're going into 6 states and also shipping overseas to Belgium, France, adding by the day new territories over in Europe. So it's been a very fast, very exciting process from our perspective. But that gives a little background on kind of who we are, where we came from, and what we've done thus far as our structure. To get into liquid a little bit, just to talk about it, I'd be remiss if I didn't. Our brewery was kind of set up initially with, we call it a 6-brand portfolio. We do 2 Belgians, one's a fruited version, one's a non-fruited version. The non-fruited is Grand Met. The fruited version is our Voodo Love Child. It's aged on Michigan sour cherry, raspberry, and passion fruit. We also do Belgian white ale, which is brewed with coriander, orange peel, juniper, and 13 different kinds of imported peppercorn. We also do a Keller Lager. It's a European-style hoppy lager called Killer Pills. Our IPA is called Hoodoo. It's a West Coast-style IPA with 7 C's and Apollo hops. And the last beer is our Winona's Big Brown Ale, and it is a robust brown ale, kind of borders on a porter, Maris Otter malt, little notes of like coffee and chocolate, although we don't add that. It's just from the malt construction we use in that product to make it kind of have those different flavor profiles. That would be kind of what we consider our core portfolio and what we kind of distribute and export. We also do some seasonals and limited offerings. Our Big Black Voodoo Daddy is our award-winning Russian Imperial Stout. It's aged on oak staves and stainless. And then we also have a double chocolate oatmeal milk stout. It's a nitrogenated product that we do exclusively in kegs previously. It's called Cowbell, and we just started this year doing our own canning. We've procured a canning line to go in line with our bottling line, and we've expanded our kind of core brand portfolio to incorporate some new brands that are going to begin to be distributed in our canning program. The first of which is Hazy Afternoon. It's a New England style IPA. It's one of those kind of hazy IPA styles that you really kind of see happening more and more in the industry, becoming more and more popular, and trying to maintain with the industry standard and the different flavors and the way people's palates are moving these days. We like to try to stay with the trends, and Kurt does an amazing job developing these new beers. So we have that one out as well, and tomorrow we're actually packaging our Polish lager for the first time in cans for distribution as well. So that program is going to continue to develop and grow as we are able. So then to get a little bit into like the brewing process, our brewing process may be a little unique and different between the 2 facilities, let alone between all the other breweries out there nationally and worldwide. We basically start with a 2-row malt. And right now we're buying that in bulk. It comes and we put it into a silo and we kind of distribute it between the 2 facilities. And then you blend that in with different wheat or specialty malt ingredients to then come up with what we call a grain build that we would use to brew the different styles and different flavors we're trying to achieve. Kurt and our brewer at the production facility, Sean, they'll get together and they'll work on putting together some kind of a recipe that will end up coming out to whatever we're trying to make. So that grain actually comes kind of as best as they can in a full, uncrushed, milled process, and then we actually then mill it in house. It's weighed, calculated, and then milled. Goes into basically our brewing vessel, in which we'll then add our water, bring it to a boil, and that's what they basically consider your mash. You mash in, you add the hot water and your grain together, and you're kind of making this slurry, this mash. Once that's then achieved, depending on again which facility we're in, we will ultimately do a process where we call Warloff, and we will take and move the water from the top of the grain that moves to the bottom of the grain over and over again and try to extract as much sugar as we possibly can. This process, really all you're trying to do is achieve at the end of the day like a sucrose water, a sugar water. That sugar water ultimately is what you really need to make the beer, along with a couple other ingredients. But once you've accomplished, this wort, if you will, at that point, we will then add any kettle additions of hops to it. There's different times in which we'll add different hops, which will impart different flavors. You can do hop additions at any point during your boil. A lot of people, will add things early on for certain flavor profiles and things later on to kind of have more of like a finished flavor. Typically speaking, and how we will do it is we'll like to save some of the more premium, more flavorful hops for the end of the boil. They tend to impart, a little more flavor at that point than early on. Once that's kind of accomplished, we then transfer our beer to a fermentation tank. Before that, it has to go through a heat exchanger, which will cool the beer rather rapidly to a more stable yeast inhibitive type state, where once that tank is then full of this now cooled soon to be beer, we will add our yeast to it. A lot of times we'll just transfer. We cultivate a lot of our own yeast in the house. We try to keep as many generations as we possibly can. Again, that's where having a lab really comes in handy. We're still developing and expanding upon our lab every day, but the fact that we have something where we can cultivate our own yeast and keep it for many generations, we'll then pitch this yeast into the tank to allow it to ferment. That process can take anywhere from 3 to 7 days, depending upon what it is we're making. After that time, we'll also do some dry hopping once we transfer again. There's a lot of things that go into like how we want to then dry hop a beer. They usually refer to that after it's a post-boil, post-brew hopping of our beers. We'll also at that point add any additional flavors we'd like to do. We have a beer out right now that we brew every summer. It's a cucumber, like white cucumber hef, and that's when we will add we buy local cucumbers, peel juice, and add that juice to the beer to impart the cucumber flavor. It's also where we'll add the sour cherry, raspberry, and passion fruit to brew the Voodo Love Child. And a lot of other beers we make, that's that stage where you'll add these things kind of in like more of a finishing tank. At that point, I'd like to always remind people that the way that the beer is actually made is when it sits in that initial fermentation stage, that yeast is now eating all the sugar that you had imparted in the brewing process. And the natural byproduct of yeast consuming sugar is alcohol and carbon dioxide. So our beer can spontaneously carbonate and also then imparts the alcohol at the time when the yeast is actively consuming sugars. During this whole process, and again, I'm not the brewer, I handle more of the business side of things, but I have a very basic understanding of how the brewing process works. I know throughout this whole time, the brewer is taking different gravity readings, and they want to achieve a certain point where they know the beer has finished, and it's the yeast has kind of concluded the consumption of the different sugars and achieves a gravity in which we're happy with the outcome of that beer before we transfer it to the finishing tank, bright tank. Those also ultimately become our packaging tanks. So once the beer is where we would like it, we then use bottling or canning line to ultimately put it into a packaging. Same thing with transferring into a keg. It has you use a Zomnagel to find out what the carbonation levels are and make sure we're happy with them there. Obviously taste testing and multiple other different testing that happens before each batch is ultimately packaged and put on for consumption. At that point, we usually will take the beer that's been packaged and put into some kind of cold storage or cellar storage. Then we'll take, obviously purchase orders or things from not only our own restaurants and retail locations, but from different wholesalers and retailers, and put together orders, and they ultimately ship out for consumption. Our base products, we put a 6-month life on those products. Our perishable IPAs, the canned products and things like that, we generally put 30 days on, and they need to be in cold storage at all times. But for the most part, our other like core portfolio, we do put like a 6-month consumption on them. That's generally just to keep distributors on their toes, to keep people rotating through stock and keeping people actively involved in, keeping an eye on the codes and things like that. Our beer, being that it's generally what we call higher gravity, higher ABV, the lowest beer we make in our core portfolio is 7.3%, and some up as high as 12. So those are generally more apt to cellaring, aging. You still wouldn't want to age a 7.3% IPA. You want to drink that fresh and store it cold, but something in the stouts and the porters and even the Belgians, they do hold up well to the test of time. Just recently we did a few beer dinners, not only in our own restaurants, but we did one up at Cannon's Chop House here in town, and the executive chef there, I brought him some bottles of Voodo Love Child from 2008. And he made a really nice reduction that he ended up using in one of the desserts for one of the courses that we paired with a beer. And he's still asking me, do you have any more of those? Do you have any more of those? And it was a case of beer from 2008 we hadn't found, had been labeled, so you think about the age on that product, and to have it still, hold up and be full of flavor and proper carbonation, speaks a lot about the bottling techniques and things that we do. To get a little bit into that, our canning line is a 5-head cask semi-automatic line. It's set up exclusively to do 16-ounce bright cans, and we ultimately, purge with CO2, fill. It then reams, seals the can. We label, date code, package off. Rinse happens during that process also. For our bottling line, we have a very high-end, state-of-the-art 6-head rotary Italian bottle filler. Double pre-evacs the bottle, purges of CO2, fills, ultimately then crowns. But prior to that whole process, it also has an inline labeling machine. So what's very nice is you can package 1,500 bottles an hour on the machine with 2 people. And even at that, they can both probably be kind of back and forth between other projects and on the line, and that's a thing that has also grown within our company. Mike Stacy's our kind of packaging director and handles all of the different things regarding our packaging and putting the beer into the consumer's hands, and it's a very important part of the job, because watching your dissolved oxygen levels and proper CO2 levels and making sure the bottles are properly stored and sanitized and purged with CO2. It's a big part of having a shelf stable and long shelf life for a product, which speaks volumes right now for distribution. So from the beer market standpoint as a whole, that's probably the next point to really get into. Things have changed a lot. When I first started here only so many years ago, you were constantly being approached by wholesalers who wanted to pick up your brand and add it to their portfolio. Everybody from Michigan to New York to Florida and everywhere here on the East Coast, at least from my vantage point. And now that we've invested and we're prepared to launch into new markets, you'll find there's a lot of wholesalers that may have been interested that no longer are, or you just flat out can't find anyone who's really willing or able to bring on new brands. The market's becoming extremely crowded and saturated, and luckily for us, we have a brand that's been around for a very long time, that has a very high reputation, regard in the industry, that has won the awards that it has and things of that nature, where those distributors are still taking those calls. They're willing to meet with us, send samples, and ultimately work on some kind of a distribution partnership. But it's becoming more and more difficult out there for everybody who's contemplating opening up a brewery or getting involved in one in some capacity. It's something you really need to make sure, the first thing you have to do is focus on the liquid, make sure the liquid is good. You need to have a plan. For us right now, it's a very subtle balance of retail and wholesale. I feel like for every time we bring on a new territory for distribution, we open another tap room. And it really does kind of help supply the demand for the wholesale end when you have a local retail. Even if you're not brewing the beer there, it does help with customer identification for the brand. It helps with your wholesaler to ultimately sell the product when there's something close by where they can sample it, try it. Just increases your brand awareness as a whole, and that's a big part of why we've begun doing a lot of exporting. It's a market that has not been so saturated, and it's just kind of coming up in the craft beer boom, if you will. So that's one of the things that has helped navigate our kind of business plan, business model for the next 5-10 years, is to really take a look at what's happening out there and what successes and failures are we seeing. And it's happening already. The customers, the beer drinkers are becoming more and more sophisticated. They know a lot more about the beers and how they're being made and where they're sourcing their ingredients, and their palates are becoming more refined. They know what they like, they know what they don't like. It's great, it's wonderful, it's great for us. Not that I wish ill on anyone. I hope everybody has a wonderful, thriving business, especially in craft beer. But at some point, the customer will determine that purchase off the shelf at Wegmans, or what restaurant and brew pub they want to eat at on a Friday night. So it's a big part of kind of how we've kind of planned and structured our business. One of the next things I was hoping to talk about in the brewing that a lot of people probably aren't necessarily aware of is when I got on, as I mentioned earlier about the ingredient selection. When you're brewing 2,000-3,000 barrels of beer like we were only a year ago from now, nobody wants to help you. You're all alone. You need to work tirelessly to look at the third-party sites to try to find hops that someone marked up 50-100%. So you're paying more money for the hops than the big guys are, and you're the little guy. And that's even if you can find them. I mean, for years and years and years, a great example, and I love telling this story, is when Kurt again started coming into the brewery and was working there and wanted to develop and work on some recipes. The first thing he tackled, the first thing was the IPAs. And this is before the IPA thing was even big. People weren't really super into IPAs like they are now. It was just kind of coming. Kurt was really into IPAs, and he's like, I really want to work on your IPA. And he had full ability to do what he pleased, and that's the first thing he tackled. And at that time, the brand was called Seasons Ipa, and the reason it was called that wasn't necessarily because the beer changed with the seasons. It's because the beer changed every time we made it based on what hops we could find and what hops were available. And again, like, we weren't getting choice, premium, dank, citrusy, awesome hops. It was just whatever we could get our hands on. And over time, gradually, slowly, Kurt was able to make a deal here or handshake here or sign a contract here, and slowly, even at only 2,000 barrels a year, was able to negotiate and find a base hop profile that made a beer that he really stood behind. He was really happy with it. This is a good product, and we can get these hops on the regular, and this is what we're going to do. So we ultimately then rebranded that beer. The last time we made that beer, Four Seasons had the recipe that is now Hoodoo. And it's now a beer that does not change, and it's consistent, and it's made with choice hops that now ultimately, which is even more fantastic, is not only can we get the hops that we had wanted to make that product, we can go out to the farms and pick who we have grow them for us. As we grow and as we can increase our barrelage and our output, Kurt last year, and he and I together now, we fly to Yakima and we go out there and we meet with our hop buyer and with the farmers, and we can go out there and we can do rubs and we can do sampling and we can do testing and we can select, which crop from which farmer, we can procure. And that's the interesting point. I mean, Citra from this farmer could be completely different from Citra from this farmer. And on the third party market, where a lot of these small breweries are buying, and ourselves included up until recently, you don't know what you're getting. It just says, that's it. And it might have the alpha acid and a couple other statistics on the box, but generally that's it. So again, as you grow and you kind of play the game a little bit, you learn more and more and more. And this goes true for any aspect. Even we're in a unique situation. We have a couple of proprietary yeast strains that we own that are unique to our brand. And there's other strains out there that aren't available to everybody, at this point in time. So it's another interesting kind of thing to understand about the industry and how it works. A couple other noteworthy things that we've been working on at my time here at Voodo that I would consider to be worth getting into is during my time there, we've constantly had to overcome obstacles, problems, things that we found cumbersome or challenging, and without an infinite budget or deep pockets or someone writing you this check, we had to figure it out. And one of those things was our packaging. As a small brewery making 2,000 barrels of beer in 6 brands, we can't purchase 20,000 boxes times 6 brands to have an individual box for every single brand that we're making to put into distribution. Furthermore, we really wanted to be in a 4-pack because, again, when you look at statistics of the market and customer purchasing there at different bottle shops and grocery stores, we noticed there's a threshold a customer doesn't really like to go over when they go to buy beer. They don't care if it has 4 or 6 beers in the package, but I'm not spending more than $9 on a 4-pack or a 6-pack. So, okay, well, we need to be on the shelf at, $7, $8, $99, and we can't do that with our premium ingredients and all the local regional fruits we add to our products and things of that nature. We can't do it. We can't be on the shelf at that price in a 6-pack. So we're like, okay, we're going to go 4-packs, but we really want to be in a 12-pack too. And at the time, there was no way to put 3 4-packs in a 12-pack to make a 12-pack. You either put 2 6-packs in a 12-pack or lose bottles in a 12-pack. So we found that as a challenge, and we took that on, and we actually ended up designing and patenting our own packaging. We're the only people in the world that have it. It's a very interesting package, and if I had slides, I would show it. But basically, if you take a normal 2 12-packs in a tray and you flip them the other way, so they're long and skinny. So it's actually 2 by 6 instead of the normal 3 by 4. So it's an interesting layout, and it allows us to then reveal with a window in the box that's cut out the 4-pack that's within it. So we can actually use the same, what we call mother carton, across all brands. So it allows us to purchase that $20,000 minimum, but one package then to use across all brands. And even still, being up at near 10,000 barrels a year, 20,000 boxes lasts us a very long time. I can't imagine buying 20,000 boxes times 6 SKUs and seasonals and everything else. So that's another kind of interesting fact that we kind of own the rights and trademarked our own packaging that our beer goes into. And one of the other things that we've done recently that I'll talk on and we can get into some questions is when we ultimately almost 2 years ago now decided that the original founding member of the company was looking to exit the industry in the business. We decided to buy that individual out of the company and retire that stock. And myself, my other partners, and other employees and different investors and owners, we all decided unanimously that we wanted to begin an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program, in which we matriculate stock to each and every employee that's a full-time equivalent for 20 hours or greater, over a 7-year amortization. So every single one of our employees will over time then vest into the company, and it was a really important part, for us to not only combat kind of losing your figurehead of your business, the guy everybody recognized as the owner or the brewer or what have you. You have to not only overcome that, but we also want to overcome a lot of the other issues, not only in the brewing industry, but in all industries in general, is employee retention and keeping employees honest. When you have 5, 6 different restaurants and tap rooms and bars, you really want to make sure that everybody there is vested, and they truly are. They literally are. And it's a great thing to be able to offer to your employees, and I think it speaks volumes about the different owners and partners that I get to work with and have the pleasure to work with every day, and the employees that I get to work with every day. Not to mention from more of the corporate standpoint, there's a lot of incentives right now for a structure like that to organize as a C or S corp in lieu of an LLC company, and to do something like this. There's a lot of incentives out there. What's great about being in, not only to mention about the local funding and things here locally, just in Meadville alone, but in the state of Pennsylvania, there's a lot. We have one of the healthiest brewers associations, the Brewers of Pennsylvania. It's one of the healthiest brewers associations in the nation. I mean, we've got Dick Yingling, and you've got these great big breweries that are doing hundreds of thousands of barrels, which is incredible. And with that kind of power comes a lot of lobbying and politics and things that I try not to get too much involved in, but they've made amazing strides here in Pennsylvania in the last couple of years with different liquor reform and all kinds of different aspects with excise tax. They're doing a wonderful incentive right now on basically changing in your excise tax back for different equipment and expansions, because they want to see these things happening in Pennsylvania. So it's great to see, and it's a wonderful thing to be where we are, and not only in Meadville but in Pennsylvania as a whole. And I guess at this point I would like to open up the floor to some questions.
Naming. Where did the Voodo name come from, and then the products? How do you go about the naming of a new product?
So the question was, where do we kind of originate the name Voodo from? And to put it simply, we will never tell. We don't like to tell where it came from. There's a lot of different things out there to the myth and theology behind where the name came from. So at this point, I'll say there are some factual, truthful things out there, but there's a lot of different ideas and concepts. I think this adds to the mystery of what is Voodo.
The product's name?
Yeah, and the other part of that, the two part was the product name. So we, myself, my brother, partners, all the employee owners, we inherited those core brands with the exception of Hoodoo, which we rebranded ourselves. A lot of time it just comes down to what we feel suits the beer. I mean, we always start with the liquid. I mean, a lot of times I can tell you how late we're up on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night texting each other, hey, I've got this in the tank and it's coming out and we need to name it. And we always come up with something that suits the beer. The beer comes first, and then we kind of file it from there. We've done a large array of not just the whole voodoo, New Orleans, Southern type influences, everything from different pop culture and entertainment and things like that that we will reference and play on. I mean, one of the things I will say that you may or may not notice is a lot of it's music driven. Why Known as Big Brown Ale is an obvious Primus reference. Voodoo Love Child is an obvious Hendrix reference. You've got a Big Black Voodoo Daddy, which is a Big Bad Voodoo Daddy obvious reference. You've got Killer Pills, which is a not so obvious reference to Cypress Hill and the Killer Hills in New York, which was another really interesting kind of thing. So there's a lot of music in there. I mean, even a lot of the like one-off can releases and things. You've got Vibrant Thing, song title. I mean, they're all over the place. A lot of it's music or other popular culture type references that we will use to kind of tie into our products.
So taste. You mentioned that you use a lot of local ingredients to come up with taste.
Right, so the question is, how do you begin with a small test batch and ultimately turn it into a big batch?
Correct.
We don't do that. We go big every time. No, when you have such a sophisticated brewer who understands brewing and science and all of the different aspects that go into brewing of beer, I mean, he's been there a very long time. He's brewed, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of barrels of beer. We've never dumped one out. I wouldn't say it's extraordinary. It's definitely rare that you have a brewery that doesn't dump just because of poor flavor. Because he's constantly developing brand new beers that never. I mean, last year we made our first time ever we brewed an Oktoberfest. And again, like that's a beer that he nailed it and never had done it before. Just he hit the books and he read up and just. At a certain point, I almost feel like you could relate it to any other profession where you've done it long enough. When you modify it, you know what this malt does. You know what that malt does. You know what this hop does. You know what this does when you adjust the water chemistry this way. So it gets to the point where you trust your gut and you go and you do it, and and thankfully it's worked out for us in that regard. I don't know if we necessarily brew a 30 barrel batch of beer the first time on a brand new recipe, but we don't do like a homebrew scale or a small scale and then do 10 barrels. Like we just do 10 barrels, because at the end of the day, even if like the product, let's say it had room for improvement, not that it was terrible or awful or nothing like that, but let's just say it had room for improvement. A batch of beer, 10 barrels that we brew out of that facility, by the time you divide that up amongst 4 restaurants, each restaurant's getting at best 4 kegs. So really, at the end of the day, it's not a large amount of volume that they won't be able to move in a weekend. And what's great is we're constantly getting feedback from our own customers. I'd like to see this, but maybe put a pinch of salt in it, or do this, and I'd like to see that happen to it. Or you ever thought about brewing with this? And it's great. And even now, with the more vested employee kind of vantage point that we've had a lot of employees kind of step up and take recommendations. Hey, the next time you brew a batch of blips and chits, let's put this in it. Let's do this hop profile. Like these things were really cool. And here's this new experimental, and again, that's another thing I didn't really get into, but not only being able to hop select, but to get first crack at brand new experimentals. I mean, we have a beer on tap over there right now. It's called HBC 630. And it's an unnamed hop. It doesn't even have a name yet. It's experimental, and they're getting feedback, and you still buy it and pay for it. But the fact that you can try something, hey, it might become the next Nelson Sauvin, it might become the next Citra. I mean, it might become the next whatever. And it's really cool to be able to get something like that and kind of trial it out. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
So, are there unique supplies, grains, things from this area that can contribute? Not hard to get them because they don't have to go a million miles and that kind of thing.
So the question is, do we choose to buy local, or what's available locally to us that we can buy local? Something of that in that regard. Unfortunately, when it comes to brewing of beer, there's very little available locally that we use. We go as local as you possibly can when it comes to every vendor we use and every supplier we work with and every bit of food that goes out of our restaurants. But when you're brewing a Belgian beer, and you need this much wheat and you need this specific hop, or we're brewing these IPAs now, and right now everybody's really into, I mentioned these kind of catchwords earlier that you see all the time when people are describing these IPAs, is it was really dank and citrusy and all of this. And I always use the example of I don't know a lot about wine, but I know like Cabernet grapes. They grow in Cabernet, France, and that's it. It's the only place you can get them, the only place they'll grow. So I'll use that example, which many people can kind of understand. Same thing with, trying to grow Galaxy hops. You can't grow Galaxy hops in northwestern Pennsylvania. They don't thrive here. We have to buy those from New Zealand. or somewhere Southern Hemisphere at the very least. And so for that reason, again, part of why we kind of consider our beer to be, and why it's in a 4-pack, not a 6-pack, is it's an expensive product to make, and we spare no expense. We have the best ingredients, and we don't care where they come from when it comes to brewing good beer that's true to style. Again, the Killer Pills, the Keller Lager, we were making, has 6 different kinds of European hops in it. And if it wasn't using European hops, it wouldn't be a European lager, it wouldn't be a Keller beer. So we're trying to brew beers to style. And then again, we still will buy lots of local ingredients whenever possible in cucumber beer, local cucumbers. Any chance we can in something that is grown exceptionally well in this region, we will automatically buy. Like we have Michigan sour cherries. That's as close as we could get to get good sour cherries. I think raspberries in Oregon and things of that. We try to buy as local and regional as we can when available. But when it comes to the beer that now we are exporting and in a large part of the north, eastern part of the United States, we've kind of always had and will continue to have the focus on having the best liquid and sparing no expense on what the ingredients will cost and where they come from to have the best.
What's down the road?
What's down the road? There's a lot in the works that I really can't get into right now because it's not quite something we're ready to make really public. The best thing I tell people is just like us on Facebook and watch it. And even if you're not on Facebook a lot, make sure the more you like our posts, the more the analytics and Facebook are going to put our posts on your news feed, and you'll see things when they happen. When it comes to bottle releases or new retail locations opening or hiring opportunities or what have you, it's a great place to start. We're going to be doing more tap rooms. It will happen, and they're going to be in more unique, further away places than we've done historically. We also will be expanding our distribution footprint. We just signed some exciting new wholesalers in Maryland. We're talking with some folks to kind of further expand Ohio. Right now we only have 2 wholesalers. We're working on expanding Ohio to get statewide coverage. We're actually working with some folks right now to get some distribution in place for Virginia and North Carolina. So those are exciting things happening. We are expanding our canning program. And we're also starting to focus not only on the exporting, but on what we consider large concessions. We're working very hard. We've been featured, at least temporarily, in PNC Park down in Pittsburgh. We're working on some different contracts with other different, what we call large concessions and festivals. We're going to be doing some very exciting things with our new production facility. Again, stay tuned. I'm not in a place to where I can announce anything quite yet, but there will be some very fun things happening at the new facility that we weren't able to do before because we lacked the space. Now we have 9.5 acres of creekfront property that we plan to do some cool things with. So that's the best I can say right now.